Good afternoon and welcome to Tuesday, June 2nd's Daily Reflection. These last days have had me reliving some very old days. As a child of the 60s, that's the 1960s to be precise, I found myself caught up in those turbulent times again. I think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who I certainly heard about, but I didn't connect as well until that fateful night of April 4th when he was assassinated. Still, all of that didn't mean as much to me then as it has come to mean in the last 40 years. I remember the summers of tension boiling over. There were protests and riots in places like New York, Cleveland, and Los Angeles. I remember seeing Tommie Smith and John Carlos raising their gloved hands as they received their gold and bronze medal respectively in the 1968 Olympics in Mexico. As we moved into the 70s, there was tension in my high school as for the first time that I can remember, some students sat during the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem in our homeroom as we began each day. I can still see our homeroom teacher's face as he glared at those two students for disrespecting. I also remember him telling the two of them to stay afterwards because he had something to tell them. At lunch that day, I caught up with my two classmates, and I learned that they had been told to either stand or leave the room and go to the principal's office the next day. That next day, they were not in homeroom as we began our day, or the next day, or the next day, or the next day. I think it was most of the year that they came to school just a little bit later than normal, or so we were told. It was their silent protest to the racial inequalities they witnessed. Somehow or other, we all managed to survive those turbulent times. Well, at least most of my friends did. Some later died in Vietnam, but that's for another reflection time. I believe I just went blindly on in life after I finished high school, college, and most of seminary. Yes, there were those moments of being uncomfortable, like living in the apartment complex in Baton Rouge during my internship year and driving into the parking lot the second day and seeing the Confederate flag hanging in a window of an apartment just down from us. I tried to have a conversation with the guy who lived there, but it never went anywhere. I guess my accent gave me away with the first few words because I was told in no uncertain words that I was just a Yankee and I would never understand. We take steps forward and we fall backward in this struggle of life. These last days have also caused me to reflect on some conversations that I've had. I do honestly ask God, why did you put me in that place? Why did I have that conversation? What am I supposed to learn from it? Well, one of those conversations took place almost 5 years ago now. I was on my yearly drive back to Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Earlier that year, I saw that one of my classmates was the pastor of a congregation in eastern Iowa. And I looked up his town. It wasn't very far from Cedar Rapids, which has a baseball team that I'd never seen before. And I made great sense to catch a baseball game on Saturday and worship with him on Sunday. After church, we headed off to lunch in nearby Ames. And as we sat chatting and catching up, we covered all of the bases that pastors cover. Where we had been in ministry since we left, what was going on, what were our hopes, what were our excitements. And since Joan and I had been married while at seminary, he wanted to know what Joan was doing. And he hadn't been married in seminary, so now I got the short story of their married life. And then, of course, as it often does, it turned to the children. He asked if Joan and I had kids, and I told him yes, Alex. And then I shared that Alex and his wife Bryn had a couple of months before, given birth to our first grandchild, Campbell. And of course, as a good grandpa, I showed him the pictures. And then he took out his phone and showed me his family pictures. Mom, dad, and 2 kids. One African American and one Asian American. They had adopted. I thought that was so great. And I asked, how did that all happen? And he told me the story. But he also offered, seems normal to me as a parent, that their life was filled with ups and downs. What parent wouldn't say that, really? Then he told me some scary moments about the number of times their son, who still to this day speaks with a slight English accent, because that's the way they spoke English in his country of birth, had been pulled over and stopped by the police. He'd never done anything wrong. Everything in the car was okay. They told me, but nonetheless, he'd get pulled over, questioned. Sometimes he was put in handcuffs while they questioned him. Sat on the side of the road a couple of times. Had to have been embarrassing for him. But he learned it was just part of life, as my friend said. And as I watched, as my friend's face changed, his smile disappeared. His voice had a twinge of both anxiety and anger. Their son faced challenges I never faced. I checked in with my friends last week to see how things were going. Everybody seems to be okay, but their son is still being incredibly careful, as he has been all of his adult life. That's just not fair in my mind. Another conversation took place 2 years ago when a friend of mine challenged me on my white privilege. I got indignant. I don't have white privilege. I've earned everything. I've worked hard. Nobody's just given me anything. Oh yeah, my parents put me through college, but who doesn't? Good thinking on my part. Then she unpacked what it meant. Did I ever have to think twice about doing something like driving in the neighborhood? Did I ever get those sideways glances when I entered somewhere? Was I ever treated even slightly different from the way others around me were treated? No, I answered. She had. Here in Vacaville, I asked? What a stupid question that ended up being. Yes, in Vacaville, in Fairfield, and almost every other place that she and her husband have gone. It's subtle, but it's there. It's not all the time, but it happens. Things I wouldn't expect to happen to them. Why? Because their skin color is different. Because they're not trusted. It's because of those conversations and other like them that I have understood slightly what it means to be treated differently, because you are not just like me. It doesn't make sense to me on one level. On an emotional level, it's upsetting and frustrating. And it causes great anxiety and concern in me, since a core tenet of my belief is, quote, God made humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. That's from Genesis, the first story of creation. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. We are all made in God's image. We are all made in God's image. So why do we make distinctions? Why are some treated unfairly? Why does my friend's son sometimes have to sit at the side of the road, hands behind his back, in handcuffs, while police officers check for something? What? I thought we'd made more progress in these 46 plus years. Perhaps we've taken some steps forward, 3 or 4, and then we take 2.5, 3.5 backwards. Progress is slow moving, and it only changes when we are aware of what's happening around us, when we have compassion and understanding, when we listen to other people's stories, and we hear what they say. Well, I look forward to seeing you on Sunday when we celebrate Holy Trinity Sunday, but more importantly for us, when we celebrate the accomplishments of 4 of our high school seniors, 2 that are members of the congregation and 2 that are adjunct members. But they're still our seniors. Join us then. I also look forward to seeing all those pictures of you in red. I've gotten some, but I know there were more people watching and participating in worship. Did you forget to wear red? Oh well. Until then, please remember, wash your hands, stay home if you're sick, love one another, practice that important social, physical distancing, 6 feet apart from one another, please. And of course, as Sergeant Esterhaus sends me out from my home every day and sends you out from your place every day with these important words, be careful out there.